Well said. I thank the member for Wyong. I call the member for Port Macquarie.
Thank you, Mr Temporary Speaker. I rise to support the motion of the Premier as we today mark the 25th anniversary of the apology by the New South Wales Parliament. I acknowledge that we gather here in this House today and in this, the oldest Parliament in Australia, on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I acknowledge and pay my deepest respects to the Gadigal ancestors who were among the first Aboriginal people to experience the devastating impact of colonisation in New South Wales. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I represent in the electorate of Port Macquarie, and I thank them for their custodianship of country. I acknowledge the survivors of the stolen generations, their ancestors and descendants, and the lands to which they belong. And I also acknowledge and respectfully remember the children who never came home. As a former Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, I had the incredible privilege to be a witness to their individual and collective strength and resilience as they brought their experiences to light. The many conversations with the Coota girls and the Kinchela boys allowed me to better understand their grief, their suffering, and the injustices of the stolen generations. The day Uncle Richard, number 28, took me to the Kinchela boys' home will be etched in my memory forever. I remain in disbelief at what I heard that day. This, of course, was one of the most notorious institutions associated with the stolen generations, and as he shared with me his memories of the conditions within this institution, the unimaginable scale of the harshness, the hardship, the cruelty, the alienation and the abuse became apparent. Thank you to Uncle Michael Whitty, Auntie Lorraine and Uncle Richard for joining us here in the chamber today. Thank you for sharing with us your hurt, your truth-telling and your healing journey. As stated in the apology moved by the New South Wales Parliament on the 18th of June 1997, the New South Wales Government reaffirmed its commitment to the goals and processes of reconciliation in New South Wales and throughout Australia. In June 2016, I made my own apology to the stolen generations, understanding that past government practices had a profound effect on Aboriginal people. In this same month, the Legislative Council Committee tabled its report inquiring into reparations for the stolen generations in New South Wales, with 35 recommendations, including a financial reparations scheme similar to those in place in Tasmania and South Australia. The Bring Them Home report, tabled in the Federal Parliament in May 1997, noted that for the purpose of responding to the effects of forcible removals, compensation be widely defined to mean reparation, that reparation be made in recognition of the history of gross violations of human rights and should consist of acknowledgement and apology, guarantees against repetition, measures of restitution, measures of rehabilitation and monetary compensation. The Legislative Council adopted this same definition of reparation when it conducted its inquiry. The New South Wales Government accepted a vast majority of the Parliamentary Committee's recommendations, and together with the Premier, I made a commitment to establish a Stolen Generations Advisory Committee to ensure our response was implemented swiftly, effectively and respectively, but most importantly, in partnership with Aboriginal people. A Stolen Generations Reparation Scheme was established, offering payments to survivors without the need for a lengthy and arduous legal process, and a $5 million healing fund sought to address the impacts of trauma, not only for survivors, but also for their families, descendants and communities. With this response, the government officially acknowledged the real and heartbreaking trauma caused by historic government policies and practices of removing Aboriginal children from their kin and country. It is my sincerest hope that by acknowledging the wrongs of the past and providing enduring and meaningful support for the future, we can avoid such a tragedy ever being repeated. However, while such a reparation scheme can make amends for the wrongs of the past, I know that no measures, financial or otherwise, will ever restore what has been lost as a result of past forceful removal policies and practices. Those who were stolen from their families, including those who joined us in the chamber today, lost their identity, they lost their culture, and they lost their community. And it would be naive for any of us to think that any level of reparation will reinstate those severed relationships and connections. In closing, Mr Temporary Speaker, I will leave you with a quote from the 1997 Bring Them Home report. The past is very much with us today in the continuing devastation of the lives of Indigenous Australians. That devastation cannot be addressed unless the whole community listens with an open heart and mind to the stories of what has happened in the past, and having listened and understood, commits itself to reconciliation. Finally, I extend my heartfelt thanks to those from the stolen generations, those who have joined us here today, and those who have had the privilege of meeting during my time in this Parliament. Thank you for your counsel and for your guidance. Thank you for nurturing me and for teaching me so much. And thank you for your enduring friendship. For that, I am eternally grateful.